As 1944 turned to 1945, the German army in the West was still embroiled in Hitler's doomed adventure in the Ardennes. The Führer continued to dismiss all warnings of an imminent Soviet offensive, and was even planning another major attack on the Allies. The limit of his interest in the Eastern Front was the plight of the Hungarian capital of Budapest, by now surrounded by the Red Army. Obsessed with Hungary's oil fields, Hitler had first designated Budapest as a festum, a fortress to be defended to the last man. And then, to the horror of his high command, he had ordered 2 powerful SS divisions to be stripped from the Eastern reserves and sent south to relieve the city. Meanwhile, along the central sector of the front, far from Budapest and its beleaguered garrison, 200 Soviet divisions were poised to thrust at the very heart of Hitler's Germany. In preparing for its great assault on the German heartland, the Red Army faced formidable obstacles. The jumping-off points were 3 bridgeheads the Soviets held on the west bank of the river Vistula, and the railway networks which could supply them had been shattered. Enormous effort had to be expended repairing the lines, and in particular the bridge at Sandomierz, from whence the first Soviet blow would be struck. By the first week in January, the flow of supplies and equipment to the 2 main Russian fronts had turned into a torrent. For the offensive, the Red Army had mustered almost 2.5 million men, 500 tanks, half of its entire armored force. The massive Soviet build-up was still far from complete when, from London, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wrote to Stalin. Churchill begged that the Soviet Union launch an attack as soon as possible to ease German pressure on the Allies in the West. Stalin had scheduled the start of the offensive for the 20th, but he agreed to change the timetable. The attack would begin on January the 12th. The opening blow in the Great Offensive was to be struck by Marshal Konev's First Ukrainian Front. Konev had massed 500 guns for every mile of his front line, and the success of his attack would depend totally on their effectiveness. The 6,000 aircraft ready for the assault would be unable to play their part in the initial bombardment. The decision to bring forward the date of the attack had virtually guaranteed they would be grounded by bad weather. In the critical sector of the front, facing Konev's forces on the Vistula, the Germans had created a tactical defense zone 10 miles deep. Inside it, on Hitler's direct orders, substantial reserves had been deployed, including 2 Panzer and 2 motorized divisions. What the waiting Germans did not know was that the Soviet artillery plan was designed to annihilate everything inside the zone. At 5 a.m. on the morning of January the 12th, 1945, Konev loosed his opening barrage. Reconnaissance units were pushed forward, hard in the wake of the falling shells. After a brief pause, the guns opened up once more, and this time, the barrage lasted 1 hour and 47 minutes. Its effect on the defenders was shattering. Four days after the Russian onslaught had begun, Adolf Hitler had moved his headquarters to Berlin, where a bunker had been built beneath the Reichschancellery. From there, he issued a stream of detailed instructions to his field commanders, and failing utterly to comprehend the magnitude of the blow that had fallen on his armies, his intervention served only to make a disastrous situation catastrophic. One of his first acts had been to order the Krak Grossdeutschland Panzer Corps to move 150 miles south from East Prussia, to an area that had already been taken by the Soviets. The Corps was forced to retreat long before it reached its destination. On January the 27th and 28th, German forces in the east were granted a temporary respite when fierce blizzards swept across Eastern and Central Europe. In appalling conditions, the Soviet offensive wavered, and when there was a sudden thaw on the 31st, the Luftwaffe found itself, for the first time since the offensive had begun, with the edge over the enemy. The German aerodromes around Berlin were hard-surfaced, while the grass fields of the Red Air Force were now a quagmire. In two, smashing supply columns and making movement almost impossible. In spite of relentless German air attacks, the Russians had succeeded in seizing several bridgeheads over the Oder. Marshal Zhukov quickly ordered his forces to replenish their supplies and in a swift assault take the German capital on February the 15th. The plan was hopelessly ambitious. After a 300-mile advance, the fuel situation had become critical. Bitter German resistance had cost large numbers of casualties, and just as serious, amongst many Russian formations, discipline had all but collapsed. After a series of increasingly dangerous probing attacks, the German 3rd Panzer Army slammed into Zhukov's line. At first, 3rd Panzer made rapid progress, but on February the 17th, its commander, General Wenck, was seriously injured in a road accident. Without its leader, the German attack lost all momentum and finally petered out. Although unsuccessful, 3rd Panzer's counterattack had an effect out of all